This month I got to go to Salem and go on what was one of the most amazing trips I've ever been on. Salem is now split up into multiple towns: Salem, Danvers, Ipswich, and Andover. The town that bears the name Salem today is a place of Halloween madness filled with people who claim to be witches, people who wish they were witches, and the majority of people just there to have a good time and bask in all of Salem's weirdness and a Halloween experience like no other, alongside some sights from the actual Salem Witch Trials. The other town, called Danvers, contains many of the actual historic sites from the witch trials, so I visited both Salem and Danvers in my search for truth, history, and Halloween fun. The first site I stopped at was in Danvers. It was the old parsonage site. This is the foundation of the Salem Village Parsonage where the witchcraft hysteria began. It was here in the home of Reverend Samuel Parris that the circle of young girls met in the winter months of 1691 to listen to the slave Tituba tell of myths, legends, and occult practices from her home country. These stories, mixed with the girls' strong puritanical beliefs about Satan and witchcraft, led to some of the most amazing events in American history. When Reverend Parris's daughter Elizabeth began acting strangely one morning, the reasonable conclusion in their minds was that she was bewitched because of Tituba's influence. This started off the witchcraft hysteria that swept through Salem as swiftly as a broom. It's crazy to think that a young girl in this actual space kicked off a frenzy that led to over 200 people being accused of witchcraft and the deaths of 20 innocent people. The next site I stopped at in Danvers was the church, which traces its lineage back to the original Salem church, wherein the witch hysteria took hold. There's really no way to overstate the power the church had in Salem. To most Puritans, church life and their family's life couldn't be separated. Next, it was on to the memorial to the victims of the witch trials in Danvers. Here you really start to see the stark difference between modern-day Salem and other towns like Danvers. While Salem celebrates all things witches, magic, and Halloween fun, Danvers is a subdued respect and remembrance of the actual victims. Next, it was on to modern-day Salem and Proctor's Ledge, the site of the witch hangings. It's a common misconception that convicted witches were burned. That only happened in Europe, and even then mostly only in France. In America, convicted witches were almost always hanged and never burned. This site was where 19 convicted witches were hanged, and was only confirmed by archaeologists to be the actual site of the hangings 1 year ago. Because time waits for no man or witch, this place, one of the most historic and interesting places in American history, is now the backyard for a Walgreens. Next, it was on to the madness of downtown Salem. Salem holds possibly the biggest Halloween festival in existence, which begins October 1st and ends November 1st. It's called Haunted Happenings and makes for an amazing experience no matter which day you come in October. In Salem, I stopped first at the Visitor Center downtown to get my bearings and hear a little more about the history of this amazing place. Then it was on to downtown to gawk at the oddly beautiful people and buildings of Salem. Here we get the first real taste of the difference between Danvers and modern-day Salem.
Oh my God, Spider-Man!
Next, I stopped by Witch House in Salem, which is the last remaining building in Salem with ties to the witch trials. It was the actual home of Judge Corwin, who was the presiding judge over the trials. At this time, courts allowed spectral evidence, which means people could use visions and dreams as evidence, which of course led to accusations and convictions of innocent people. Thankfully, by the end of the trials, spectral evidence was permanently banned in U.S. courtrooms, and only forensic evidence could be used. Next, I stopped by the Witch Dungeon Museum, which puts on a live reenactment of the Salem Witch Trials and allows you to tour through a recreation of the dungeon the accused witches were held in. Unfortunately, again, time waits for no one, and the real witch dungeon has now been destroyed and a series of homes is built in its location. Once I wrapped up the historical sites, it was on to track down a few fun sites, namely the filming locations of the best Halloween movie ever made, Hocus Pocus. I stopped by Town Hall, Allison's house, the high school, the Salem Common area, and unfortunately I didn't make it to Max and Danny's house or Thackeray Binks's home, which is now called Pioneer Village because you can't reach those by foot, and as you can imagine, Salem traffic in October is insane. But all of these amazing filming locations are still there today and look exactly the way they did in the 1990s. My time in Salem was amazing, and whether you're interested in ancient American history, modern American movie history, or just a good time, Salem is as good as it gets for Halloween.